Hello, and welcome to the Angus and Pete Show. Views and opinions are strictly those of the presenters and their guests and should not be taken as advice. Goodness knows, we're not qualified to advise you about anything. Side effects may include mild amusement and occasional enlightenment with feelings of embarrassment, apathy, disappointment, and pity.
Welcome to episode 14. I'm Angus Pacey.
And I'm Pete Brown, and we are the Angus and Pete Show.
The place where you can listen to two guys chatting about this riveting world of customer engagement.
You know, customer engagement, otherwise known as call center, contact center, customer service, customer experience, CX, and whatever else you're calling it this week.
And if you want to know more about us, then check us out on LinkedIn. So first up, Pete, what's in our post bag this time?
We've got a few items in the post bag. First up is Alicia from Birmingham. She's in marketing for one of the well-known CX tech vendors, and she says she loves the podcast. She's relatively new to the industry, and she's finding the whole Angus and Pete Show an educational experience, which I think is a good thing. So thanks very much for your kind words, Alicia.
We're getting a theme here from people that they're finding it educational.
Yeah, surprising. And some of them are finding it a little bit entertaining too, which is a bonus, I suppose. I met a chap called Roger in Amsterdam when I was at an event, and I was chatting to him about other stuff, and it turns out that he's a regular listener to the podcast, and he gave me a few suggestions about topics for future episodes, and we'll take those on board. And I was interested to know what his listening habits were. You know, when does he listen? And he told me that he has 3 or 4 podcasts that he regularly listens to, and we're one of those.
No,
and
it's good.
He listens to us in bed.
What?
Yeah, he listens to us in bed. Now, I did establish that it wasn't just to put him to sleep, and he assured me that it wasn't. But yeah, he listens to us in bed. So I've got this sort of, slightly uncomfortable feeling about you and me and Roger being involved in some sort of weird CX-based podcast menage a trois in a bedroom in Amsterdam, but that's probably a topic for another day.
Okay, you've now just created a mental picture in my head that I need to unthink.
Thanks for that, Roger. And finally, Danny from Cape Town has been in touch. Now, Danny is a product marketing manager in a fairly large reseller, and she's been tasked with building a new go-to-market strategy for a contact center as a service platform. And she's never done it before. Okay. This is new to her. It's new territory. And she's asked, can we give her a structure? Can we give her some ideas about what does she need to be aware of? What does she need to be mindful of as she's going through that?
Yeah, so we've got to just think about highlighting some of the key things to consider.
Yeah. And I think what we should also do is have this conversation based on some assumptions, just to contain it and keep it pragmatic. So let's assume that we're talking about a reseller who's taking one vendor product to market. It's all been approved internally. Everyone's happy, and we're just talking about the motion of go-to-market. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that it's a CX, contact center cloud technology product. The third one is that, Danny, you've got all the resources you need and all the time you need to do everything properly, which is probably totally unrealistic in the real world. But for the purposes of this exercise, let's go with that, and it will give us a chance to cover the key things. So, Angus, I know there's a structure around this. You know there's a structure around this. We've probably got slightly different ideas about what the priorities are. Where would you start?
So I think you're right. There is a structure to it. And I think generally people might use different names for them, but there's 6 kind of blocks of activity that you need to consider. Okay. You can do some of them in parallel. That's not necessarily linear, but I think they're always there. First one is engage. That's kind of the stage where you're in discussions with the vendor and you're getting all the information out of them that you need to go forward. So this is really discovery with the vendor. Okay. Second one is onboarding, where you're building your service on that vendor technology, but you're building your own capability to go to market. Next one is where you start selling to customers, sell. So that's self-explanatory. Deploy, this is we're getting into how you're going to deliver the service itself. And then you get into adopt, which is probably the most important one. Getting your customer to actually use your service and hopefully expand it. So it gives you more revenue generating opportunities.
Okay.
And then you get to the forgotten stage, what I call the forgotten stage, the renew or exit. So how do you renew an existing customer? What do you need to do? If it has gone pear-shaped or situations have changed and the customer needs to exit, you need to think about what that exit plan is as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess when we're thinking about cloud services, the considerations, the way that you're having those discussions, the things you're considering are going to be quite different between a traditional on-prem go-to-market and go-to-market for a cloud-based service.
Yeah, there will be, because you're not racking and stacking anymore. There are no boxes to deliver or software to download and install, but there are other things that you need to do. So kind of let's look at that engage phase. And that's really about getting all the information that you need.
Okay.
There's one thing that I think a lot of people forget. You've got to absolutely understand how what you are building fits into the partner program of that vendor.
There's a massive assumption there, right? That the vendor's actually got a partner program. Let's face it, there are vendors out there that are very well disciplined, very structured around go-to-market through channels and partners, resellers. There are others that are direct. And there are those in the middle that may pay a bit of lip service to the whole partner ecosystem, but really can't help themselves. They naturally want to do the deals directly. So I guess the first thing, Danny, is if you're speaking to your vendor and they haven't got a partner program, that might tell you quite a lot about what you can expect as you move forward.
Yeah. Some vendors are direct every single time, and they will go indirect if they must.
Yep.
They know that's their preference. The other thing, when you're looking at these partner programs, go through it because they have a major impact on your profitability, your margin stacks. It has a major impact on some of your operational models, how you get support. So it is something that is worth absolutely understanding in detail.
That will give you a clue as to how serious they are about the indirect model and how you maybe need to cut your cloth accordingly, depending on what their direct model looks like.
Yeah. And also look for things that are adjacent to you, that if you get into building a CX practice and service offering, what are the other pull-throughs that you can get?
Yeah, okay.
So expand your opportunity, don't leave money on the table. The second thing, call us out right up front, is legal. T's and C's, all the legal things that you need from a contract perspective. Get that going as early as you possibly can, because that generally is a long pole in the tent. It takes the longest to finalize, especially if you've got lawyers involved. A, they're busy people. You can't always get hold of your legal department. B, they bill by the hour, so they like stretching it out. Not all lawyers are like that, so let me put a disclaimer in that, but I'm not going to say any more.
No, please don't.
What I've found from experience, they are very busy people, so it can take a long time. Start that early. They will ask for information as well.
You're selling on a service, you're reselling something. There's the whole contractual framework between the vendor and the reseller as a customer, and then there's the whole legal framework between the reseller as a seller and their end user buyer. So I guess you've got to look at how those terms and conditions pass through, how one end relates to the other, and as a reseller, make sure you're not compromised in the middle. And if you are, you understand what your risks are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that the vendor's also got terms that go direct to the end user as well. So you've got all these combinations and permutations.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing is, don't try and invent everything from a marketing perspective yourself. Go and ask the vendor, what is the positioning that they are putting forward into the market? What is the ideal target segment that you want to go after? There's a big difference whether you're going mid-market and large enterprise or really small in the SMB market. So investigate with them where to target. The other thing is, what sales support does the vendor offer? The vendors have got salespeople. They are absolutely trying to create demand for you. And how you interact with those sales teams is really important. It's good to understand how the salespeople are being driven internally within the vendor themselves. What are they being paid on?
When you start to look at the way sales teams are paid, quite often you see a little bit of contradiction appearing. Some parts of their sales force are driven to help you more than others.
And the other thing to think about once you understand kind of how the sales teams are being driven is, how do you become visible to them?
Yeah.
Because it's all about mind share. So I would absolutely have discussions with the people in the vendor that says, how do I make my offer, what my capabilities are, what my areas of speciality are, visible to your salespeople, because they can be a very valuable source of leads. They can be a
Yeah.
valuable source of information. So, Intel goes both ways. It's not only you to the vendor telling them what you're doing, it's also about them telling you where they're operating. So you've got to be visible. That's something people forget.
So we spoke about the legal piece, and we've sort of touched on the commercial, financial motivators of individuals. What about the bigger commercial picture? We're all in this to make money, right? So what's to look at there?
It kind of builds on the partner program, but what is the model from a commercial transaction perspective that the vendor prefers? Because there are many, and they're not all the same. There
What
are
are they?
differences. So you've got a referral model where essentially you providing leads back to the vendor, and you might get a finder's feedback. Agency model, you own the relationship with the customer, but then all the design, delivery, deploy is done by either the vendor or another third party. So that's a sort of another level of complexity on top of the referral model. Normal one, resale, where you taking that platform, you reselling its capabilities. And wholesale really applies to service providers, where they have an agreement with the vendor to take a block of subscriptions, and they're going to on-sell that with a very defined go-to-market model. That's for service providers, not generally value-added resellers.
So the referral model and the agency model, is the vendor writing the order on their own paper?
The referral model, the vendor will be writing their own paper. Agency model, it can differ. So vendor can write it or you can write it, but the bulk of that onus for delivery sits on the vendor.
And those things aren't mutually exclusive. So it's possible to be one or all of those things to a vendor, depending on the territory you're in, the customer you're dealing with, the place you are in your go-to-market strategy. It's quite a risk-free, friction-free start to say, okay, well, let's get our feet wet with a little bit of an agency model. And as we go through, we'll build some critical mass around customers, and then we'll start to take them direct. Is that something you've seen?
Agency is a formal program and construct, so it depends whether it's available or not. But easy entrance into a market in the resale model, which is the one that we see most, is you resell the service, but that when it comes to design, delivery, deploy, you make use of either the vendor's capabilities or another partner's capabilities that might help you do that. That is a very common model while you're gaining that expertise if you don't have it already.
Okay. And what can we expect around pricing and discounts?
Discounts are generally within frameworks. There's always special cases where there might be a reason to have a different commercial construct. But I think speak to the vendors, understand what those frameworks look like. What other programs and incentives are sitting on the side that might not be seen as strict discounts. It might be a promotion that's driving for a quarter or two, half a year or a year. But then there are also other programs that are part of a partner program that then incentivize you to drive certain behaviors as well. All the stuff you would expect from a vendor that is selling through the channel, selling indirectly. Understand that up front, because it's critical to how you operate, what your P&L looks like, what your pricing to the market looks like.
Okay. I know a lot of vendors give preferential rates to early registrants of a deal. Deal registration gives you another couple of points on your discount. However, that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you're starting to tell vendors early on in the sales cycle what you're working on, great. But you've got to trust them that they're not going to get involved, interfere, introduce other people, because I know it's not supposed to happen, but it does happen, right? So talk about deal registration. It's one of those things that I've never felt totally comfortable with one way or another. It's not perfect, is it?
Well, I think deal registration exists for vendors to get early visibility of what you're working on in your funnel, in your pipeline. There's some unintended consequences of deal registration. Now, you've name checked the one. You've got to trust. And if that trust breaks down, then you've got a problem. But I tend to look at it slightly differently. Where you get isolated cases like that, don't think that an exception is the rule. With vendors that have an indirect model, they are very focused on channel neutrality. being neutral between partners, protecting partners that are doing all the work on a deal from ambulance chasers that come in at the 11th hour, and it does happen, and they think, I'll just come in a couple of points lower on the pricing, and then I'll win the deal.
But having said all of that, the vendors have also got to manage the reality of winning business. And I've seen situations that get really awkward where the reseller is doing all the work, but the quality of their work is basically, well, crap. And they're not going to win the deal. The customer doesn't like them. They haven't covered their bases. It doesn't look good. And they've got another partner that may be able to do a better job. You know, I've seen that happen, and vendors have to make tough decisions sometimes. So again, if you have a tight relationship, if people know what you're good at and what you're not so good at, if you've set your stall out and the opportunities that you're working on are aligned with your strengths, then that's less likely to happen. But it does happen.
It does happen. And I think put yourself in the vendor's shoes. Ultimately, they want a good customer experience for the end customer.
Yeah.
So, they're going to have to make some tough decisions. And as a partner, it's uncomfortable. But you know what my take on this is? Sort your shit out. Don't get yourself into the position where you're doing a crap job.
And in our world of as a service, it's all about that longer term relationship. It's all about driving adoption and optimization of services. So back in the day when you basically dropped a box on the floor and took your annual maintenance revenue, and the game was don't touch it, don't overcomplicate it, leave it as it is, and let's just quietly take the money and work on a renewal. It's a very different, much more dynamic process. That also leads on to billing, right? Because it occurs to me that the whole thing around billing is much more complicated now, particularly stuff that's based in the public cloud. It's got a lot more cost of sale on the back of it than those traditional technologies. So what can we say about billing? Because I've seen it become a real mess. You know, you've done everything and you can't get an invoice out the door, or you can get an invoice out the door and nobody's going to pay it because it's as confusing as hell and it doesn't stack up with the real world.
Yeah, and it's very different to the on-prem environment when you're in the cloud. You know, on-prem, you placed an order on somebody, you got a box, you shipped the box, you shipped an invoice with the box, and you got it paid 60, 90 days later if on a good day. I would actually move the priority of billing. You know, we've come to this sort of almost at the back end of this section, and it's like it should be right up front because it's one of those complex topics.
Up there with the legals.
It's up there with legals. You've got to find out what information you're going to get from the vendor. You've got to figure out how you're going to bill it. And if you've got to make any changes to your billing systems and capabilities, that takes time and discussion and design. So get cracking on it really, really early on, because ultimately it's the most important thing here. If you can't generate a bill that somebody understands, you can't get paid, then the rest of this is just theory. So very important. I think the other thing is, from a delivery perspective, understand expectations. This is really important. What are the vendor's expectations? Do they match to yours? What are their order processes? How do they work? What are their delivery processes? What are their time scales, their service levels? Understand that, because if you don't understand that really well and you make assumptions, you're going to be setting expectations incorrectly.
So Danny, there's a framework for that engagement process. Then we get on to onboarding. So we've done all the hard work. We've established our relationship, and we understand the legals, and we understand the pricing, and we understand the billing, and we know what we're going to do when we accidentally get an order. What's the whole onboarding thing now? Engagement is talking about it. Onboarding is doing it, right?
Exactly. Onboarding is building it. You know, it's doing the stuff so that you can give stuff to sales. They can start selling, and also you know what you're going to do when you get an order. So the first comment, you want to build assets that will allow you to start selling as soon as possible, and also build that minimum framework so that you can deliver something to your customer, because it will come quicker than you think if your sellers are good.
So a minimum viable product that you can start to get to market and make money out of, doing what you're doing and optimizing as you go.
Yeah, and also gives you a chance to test whether what you're doing is working.
When it comes to rolling out to sales teams in particular, I've seen two approaches. And the first one is the general rollout. So here's a new service, here's the pricing, here's the discount structure, this is how you're going to get paid, here's some pitch decks, here's some background information, off you go. And you roll that out as an education program to your whole sales force. But I've found a much more effective way is to ramp up the exposure to the sales team by starting with people who get what you're trying to sell already, maybe already quite good at it, and actually are motivated to do it too. I.e., salespeople that can be your sponsors, your champions in the wider sales organization. Because what I found is that there's nothing like success to get other salespeople interested. So get it out there, support those people, smother them in love, make sure that their deals come in, make sure that their deployments are successful, and that then starts to build confidence and competence in your new service.
Yeah, I think it's a good approach. I think, one, you've got to have the tools to take to your champions, your early sales adopters.
Yeah.
So make sure that you've got all the tools to really get them going. What your sales pitch looks like. What are they going to say? Make sure that you can articulate that really clearly, and then give them the license to tell you what works and what doesn't work, so that you can tune it as you go. Also, if you go with that sort of find the champions route, it means that by the time it scales into the broader sales organization, what people are going to be using actually works because it's been tested and refined.
So actually, a lot of that is, yes, it's about material and content that's relevant to this particular product, but a lot of that is about sometimes re-educating on the sales approach. There's a big difference between selling on-premise technology boxes and selling a cloud service in terms of approach.
And remember, you have to figure out what you need for technical discovery, but please don't lead with that with your sales guys. Leave that until the right time. It's not the right thing to do in the beginning.
And the vendor can give you a lot of good reference information to support that exercise.
Yeah, and you should have that from your engage phase. Absolutely important things is, how do you take an order? What do you need in order to get an order? So how do you generate a quote? Make sure you've got your T's and C's nailed up, your legals. What does your project plan for delivery look like? What is that kind of order process through, and interlock that with the vendor? The one thing that people get tripped up on are proofs of concepts and trials.
Yeah.
Because in the cloud, people like these. I was talking to a reseller this afternoon, and they have a strategy of leading with proof of concepts. They've decided that is part of their sales strategy, and they've got it very well mapped out. What their objectives are, how they do it.
The trials are great, but sometimes that's not good enough either. From experience, there are those buyers that know what they want to buy. They can define a reason, they can define a requirement, they can define a business case, and that's the traditional way. And they're good for a POC, because any decent proof of concept is going to have a statement of work and some deliverables and acceptance criteria around it, so you just don't leave it open-ended. So in that respect, it's a mini project. It's a mini deployment. But I've spoken to a lot of customers who have said, yeah, we get that, but you know what? This stuff's all new. Got all these digital channels and we're not quite sure what we want to do with them. And now we've got AI to make it all nice and interesting and complicated. We just want something that we can sort of play with and try out, that you're not going to take away from us, that you're not going to put loads of pressure on us to move forward with until we're good and ready. And what I've also seen is people selling effectively mini systems, startup kits, because it just reduces that friction, barrier to entry, and again, minimizes the perception of risk, which is important. So we're sort of straying off back into sales strategy world, and this podcast is really about the structure of go-to-market, but that's all about go-to-market, right? Getting the customer to use the thing. Everything else we've spoken about is mental masturbation unless you can deliver something.
What are those next actions? What processes do you need in order to deliver a customer beyond, if they haven't had a proof of concept or a trial, they're just going straight to order? What's that technical deployment process going to look like? Users are going to want to test it and accept it. User acceptance testing still happens in the cloud. What are those criteria so that it doesn't become open-ended? And when this is going on, who's going to own what part of this process? So think of those operational things, and things like moves, adds, changes, those sorts of things.
I guess whilst there are differences between the on-premise deployment and the cloud deployment, the bit we've just spoken about, the delivery process, actually is very similar, if not the same. There are technical aspects to it. There's user acceptance testing, there's training, there's the whole rollout. They are similar. So you've probably already got the framework of that. You've just got to adapt it slightly to cater for the cloud service.
Yeah, I think where the differences do manifest themselves again in the cloud is when you get past that deployment phase and you get into adoption and then renew and exit. But I think just looking at how long we've been chatting. I think those topics, maybe we need to take those for another episode.
Maybe we do. Okay. I'm going to try and summarize the takeaways for Danny. So the first thing is, when you're building your CX practice, there are 6 high-level stages that you need to address and you need to consider. Engage, onboard, sell, deploy, adopt, and then there's the whole piece around the renewal process, hopefully, or maybe the exit process. And don't assume that each stage is just going to happen, and don't assume that everybody knows what each stage is. Number 1. Number 2, we spoke a lot about the engage phase, and this is all about you understanding your vendor and your vendor understanding you, so that nobody gets surprises down the line. And we didn't say it like this, but it sounds like focus on the boring stuff first.
Yeah.
Focus on the legals, focus on the billing, focus on the commercial bits and pieces, because actually it doesn't matter what you're selling, how exciting the product is. If those things don't stack up, then it doesn't make sense. So stop right there. And there's understanding how your vendor goes to market themselves and how you fit. Then we spoke about the onboarding phase. Engaging is talking about it. Onboarding is about doing it. So this is about building your technical capability, looking at your sales processes, operational delivery, how you're going to invoice and bill for this stuff, and the legal implications, weaving in all the information that you gathered in the engage phase into actually doing something and executing it as a business. We spoke about preparing to sell.
Yep.
How do you educate and motivate and manage your sales teams to actually go out there and take this lovely shiny new thing that you just spent the last 6 months getting to market, actually getting them to take it to market. And finally, there's the whole deployment phase. It's not just about deploying a product or a platform. It's about deploying something that you can cross-sell and upsell on, that you can drive adoption of, and growth comes from there. So the deployment phase is really the first stage in a marathon when it comes to the cloud, not a sprint.
Yeah.
You've got to take a longer term view.
Your deployment phase, if you're lucky, is going to keep going for quite some time.
Okay, how did that sound?
I think you nailed it in one.
Good. Well, Danny, I hope this has been useful. Tune into the next episode, because we will be back next time with episode 15.
So in the meantime, please follow the Angus and Pete Show page on LinkedIn for news notifications. Please message us directly, leave comments to tell us what you want to talk about. Let us know how we're doing and keep that post bag absolutely bulging, because that is our source of ideas.
The show's available on all your favourite podcast platforms. So listen, like, subscribe, share, repost, help us spread the word.
Hold on, Pete. We can't shut down this podcast before we have done the joke of the week.
I do have a product manager joke. Would you like to hear it?
Okay, this one is interesting to me.
So a product manager, an engineer, and a designer walk into a bar. And the bartender says, "What will it be?" And the engineer says, "I want something strong and efficient." So the barman gives him a double shot of chilled premium vodka. And the designer says, "I want something sleek and elegant." So the barman prepares him a beautiful raspberry and passion fruit martini. And the product manager says, "Right, I want something cheap that customers can't do without, scales to millions of users, and can be delivered by the end of the quarter." And the barman sighs and gives him a glass of tap water.
That is a good one. That is a good one.
There's a message in there for us somewhere. Anyway, cheers, Angus.
Cheers, Pete.
Thanks for tuning in to the Angus and Pete Show. Remember, it's based on the personal views and opinions of the hosts and their guests. If you're feeling aggrieved or litigious, take a chill pill. There's already enough stress in the world. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform for more episodes. We'll see you next time. Oh, and tell your friends.